This custom shop Explorer has come into the workshop to have some work done on its neck. The owner finds the neck is just way too thick for him, and he would like the thickness of the neck reduced. And if we measure the thickness of the neck, then maybe you'll see why he wants this work done. Measuring just behind the first fret, we have a neck thickness of 23.5 millimeters. And at the 12th fret, we have a measurement of just over 26 millimeters. So that is pretty generous. By contrast, a typical Les Paul would be 20.5 millimeters at around about the first fret, and say 23 at the 12th fret. So this is a pretty chunky neck. I'm going to aim to thin this neck down to about 21 millimeters, 20.5, 21 millimeters, around about this area, first fret, and maybe 23 and a half, 12th fret area. And to do this job, I'm going to be using a couple of my favourite tools, which are my spoke shaves. I love using these tools. I've got two types, one with a flat plate, and this has got a curved plate. But what about the neck profile that I'm going to try and achieve? Whereas Fenders typically have a more C-shaped profile, Gibsons have more of a D-shaped neck profile. And we can see here's a template for a sort of typical Gibson shape. And this sort of sits on quite nicely. Whereas if we were to go for a C-shaped template, this one, it's probably quite hard to sort of pick up on the camera, but in effect what we have is a lot more meat in this area of the neck on a typical Gibson neck profile. So this one doesn't sort of sit over quite as well, whereas that neck profile sits on more comfortably. And I'm going to try and replicate this sort of typical Gibson D-shaped neck profile. But before I start any work, I'm going to wrap the body to protect it so it doesn't get damaged whilst I'm working on the guitar. The shaping of this neck is now complete, and the open grain of this mahogany neck have been filled with a thixotropic grain filler, and I'm now ready for spraying. For spraying, I'm going to be using nitrocellulose lacquer, which is what the body is been sprayed with originally, and so hopefully I'm going to get a nice transition between the new lacquer and the old lacquer. I shall be spraying a number of coats of sanding sealer, followed by black, jet black, and then a number of clear coats over the top of that. The body itself, the bits that I don't want to get spray on, has been sort of properly masked off, and the last thing I need to do is just mask off the white binding so I don't get any black lacquer, particularly on the binding. The black lacquer has been applied, been left for 2 weeks, and I can see just a little bit of sinking into the grain, but I'm now going to cut this back before I apply the clear top coat, so I think that sinking in the grain will pretty much disappear. I was also keen to keep this Gibson custom logo, so I've got quite a noticeable ridge here, so I'm going to have to work this area before I apply some clear coats. I can also just feel a slight ridge where the black meets the white binding, so again I'm just going to have to work that area, and once the clear coats are applied, I think that slight ridge that I can feel will disappear. So now time to cut this back before applying some clear coats. The clear coats have been applied and have been given 7 to 10 days to harden. And looking at this surface, that looks very good to me. I think I'm going to be able to go straight to 1500 grit wet and dry to cut back and level this surface, refine it before going on to 2000 and 2500, then putting the neck on a buffing wheel. I may have to go back to 1000 once I start working with the 1500 grit. But let's start with that and yeah, move on to finishing this job. Okay, so that's the buffing polishing finished, and I'm happy with how that looks. Black is really difficult to get a perfect finish. Any tiny scratches left by the leveling process are just magnified by a black finish, but that looks just perfect to me. Very happy with that. The other thing I'm looking at is the transition between the new finish here and the old finish, and I reckon I've got a pretty seamless transition between the two at this end and also at the heel end, and also importantly I've managed to keep this Gibson custom logo. As for the original reason for doing this work, which is to reduce the thickness of the neck, we now have a neck thickness at the first fret of just a tad over 21 millimeters and just a little over 23 millimeters at the 12th fret. So hopefully the owner of this guitar is going to find this a much more comfortable neck to play.